Hello all. In this lecture we will be looking at what are some of the earthquake hazards or the effects of different earthquake events, and we will also be looking at what is the process of seismic hazard analysis, and we will also be introducing what are different types of this analysis. Generally the structural design engineers as part of the design process for earthquakes, they go to different building codes, and from there they pick what we call as the ground motion parameters or seismic hazard parameters. So they pick from different building codes these seismic hazard parameters. These parameters are basically reflected and are used to calculate the effective earthquake forces which the structure should be able to withstand. So those forces are applied to the computer model of our structures as part of the design process, and the model is analyzed, the internal forces are calculated, and it is ensured that the structure should have enough capacity to resist those forces safely. So I think the structural designers should also have a basic idea about from where this seismic hazard parameters are coming from, what is the process behind their estimation or their establishment. So that process is the seismic hazard analysis, and that we will look into a bit more detail in next sessions. In this session we will only introduce some of the hazards which are caused by the earthquake events, and we will also be just introducing the process of the seismic hazard analysis. So let's start this discussion, and we will start with the earthquake hazards. It has been estimated that out of all the deaths caused by natural disasters, around 60% of them are caused by earthquakes. And if you look at the 20th century data, around 17,000 deaths per year are caused by different earthquake events around the globe. So this figure tells us the historical data, and the stars or these symbols are shown here. Their size is the actual magnitude which was recorded, and their color is showing the depth. So you can see here that in this figure earthquakes occur at several locations, and some of the locations of several mega earthquakes, here you can see big stars, they are located on very densely populated areas. Here for example, here. So several big cities are located on earthquake prone areas, and they have been hit by several devastating earthquakes in 20th century. So earthquake is one of the biggest causes out of all natural disasters. Earthquakes cause around 60% of the total deaths. So if we look at the earthquake hazards, there can be ground shaking, the shaking of the ground or vibration caused by the earthquake. The earthquake hazard also include the ground displacement along the faults, or also called as the surface rupture. So surface rupture is different from ground shaking. It is the direct deformation of the top surface of earth, and that can also cause huge losses. Another ground hazard is the ground failure, soil liquefaction, or the earthquake triggered landslides, mudslides, or the differential soil settlement. All of these are the earthquake hazards. They are originally triggered or caused by ground shaking, which are basically caused by earthquakes. Tsunami is also an earthquake hazard. Floods from dam and levee failures, the ground shaking or surface rupture sometimes may also cause failures in dams or other hydraulic structures that may result floods also. Earthquake may also trigger fires, and those fires will also be earthquake hazards. So these are all the earthquake hazards, and they can cause significant social and economic loss in several densely populated areas of the world. So for example, let's see first the ground shaking hazard, some examples. This is the Wenchuan earthquake in China in 2008, and it was a magnitude 8 event, and here you can see the structural damage caused by this particular earthquake. Almost all of the structures here experienced moderate to high damage, and some of them are completely collapsed, you can see here. Another example from Kashmir 2005 earthquake, this figure is taken by Professor Penang Varnichai, and this was taken 1 month after the earthquake event. It was a magnitude 7.7 event and caused more than 70,000 deaths. So you can see here that people are just started living over the rubble, and these are their houses which were made of reinforced concrete, and most of them in the northern part of Pakistan, they were collapsed. Another example from Yogyakarta, Indonesia in 2006, this was the result of a magnitude 6.2 earthquake event. So you can see here that this earthquake caused severe damage to several structures. Some of them were completely collapsed, some were partially collapsed. So earthquakes induce a huge structural as well as non-structural loss to different residential buildings and commercial buildings. This example is from 1999 Chi-Chi earthquake in Taiwan. So this is the Xikang Dam, and this dam was located on a, I think, previously unknown fault, and that fault was running like this. And you can see here, I think a closer picture here, that one part of the land is just lifted up around 8 to 9 meters, and this one, this part of the dam is just lifted up. So the level was this one, the original level, but now it is lifted up. So this difference is around 9 meters. This is surface rupture. This is not ground shaking. This is a surface rupture induced by an earthquake. So surface rupture is also an important, you can say, earthquake hazard, and the only strategy to reduce the loss in case of surface rupture is to just not build on the fault lines. So this was previously unknown fault, and the dam was constructed on it, and it just slipped. The surface rupture caused this huge differential movement, which resulted in the failure of this dam. So you cannot design your building against surface rupture, because the maximum differential movement for which you can design your buildings, maybe it is in just centimeters or millimeters, but not like this. Here you have the differential movement of 9 meters. So the only way to avoid the damage or loss in case of surface rupture is to just not build on the fault lines. So we ensure that for all the known faults which are capable of producing earthquakes, we just don't build our structures on those fault lines or very close to those fault lines. So we cannot design our structures to resist the surface rupture. Another earthquake hazard is the soil liquefaction, which means the soil behaves like a liquid if it is subjected to ground motions. Its bearing capacity is lost, so it just becomes liquid. It behaves like a liquid material. So structures which are subjected to the soil liquefaction may just overturn. So you can see here one example in Philippines in 1990 Luzon earthquake, that these structures, they just rotated, they just overturned. Similarly, this is the Philippines, and here you have in Turkey this earthquake in 1999, this building just rotated or overturned. So the soil liquefaction hazard is also caused by earthquake events. Another example is damage to sewers. Here you can see that if the soil is subjected to liquefaction, here you have the liquefied soil, and if, for example, you have a manhole which is empty, so due to buoyant forces it will just experience uplift forces, because the soil will behave like a liquid. So these dotted lines are represented by the original configuration of this sewer system, where you have manhole, a rigid pipe connecting here, and a flexible pipe connecting here. So because of these uplift forces which will be experienced due to the liquefaction of soil, the actual manhole may just lift up, and we can have a problem of sand boiling, and that manhole structure can just come out of the ground and then it can be damaged. So if we have any rigid pipes, for example made from concrete or any other cementitious materials, because they are cheap, so generally the concrete pipes are used, but they will have cracks in them because of this movement or this uplift force caused by the liquefied soil. So the flexible pipes will not be damaged in this case. So but although the flexible pipes will be costly compared to the concrete pipes. So an example from this kind of a hazard you can see in Hokkaido in Japan 2003. So because of that, this whole manhole structure, the sewer structure, it just come out from the ground because of the uplift pressure from the liquefied soil. The underground pipe failures, that is also one of the hazards caused by the earthquake events. This is the example from Luzon earthquake in Philippines 1990. The whole underground structure, the pipe structure, the system is failed, and because of that you can just imagine what are the consequences of that. The water system or water supply system may fail in such cases. Another earthquake induced hazard is the landslide, earthquake triggered landslides. So the slopes which are not stable, they may just trigger landslides, and that landslides may result in significant structural damage and other losses. So this example is from the same Wenchuan earthquake in China. You can see here that this landslide caused a lot of damage here. The communication system here, you can see the poles and you can say these wires, whole system is just disrupted. So the embankments dynamic stability, obviously when they are subjected to horizontal shaking like this, so if they are not stable enough, they will develop these failure surfaces and they will just settle to new positions. So ultimately you will have failure of the unstable embankments as a result of ground shaking, and this is also one earthquake hazard. So this example is from Bhuj earthquake in India in 2001. You can see here that this damage to these embankments, they are caused by or triggered by the earthquake movement. A very important earthquake hazard is tsunami. So that earthquake hazard is basically caused if the earthquake movement is suddenly caused a shaking in the ocean. So a sudden upward push caused by the rupture of an earthquake, that push may induce large waves in water, and when they reach to the close to the lands or to the shallow areas, their height increase and they can cause significant damage. So several coastal areas around the globe, they have experienced this hazard of earthquakes. So this example is from 2004 great tsunami caused by the Indian Ocean earthquake, and that is a location in Thailand, a coastal location here. You can see that this mark is showing the maximum water level which was experienced in that tsunami. So you can imagine the level of damage and loss which is caused by this earthquake hazard. This example is from 1995 Kobe earthquake. So here you can see that the fault line runs along this direction, and this is the epicenter here. So you can see here that just one earthquake here, 1995 Kobe earthquake, caused several of the earthquake hazards. These locations with fire symbol are basically telling us the locations of earthquake induced fires. But not only fires, we have many houses collapsed, and similarly the multiple collapsed spans of over 20 kilometers of this Hanshin expressway. Similarly here also several collapses. Here we have the locations where the extensive liquefaction was experienced, collapsed sea walls, leaning cranes. Similarly, also varying damage to the steel spans, beam seats and major crossings here at this location. So just one earthquake caused several of the earthquake hazards: liquefaction, ground shaking, and also several collapses in buildings and tunnels, as well as the expressway bridges. In fact, this earthquake caused a tsunami also, but its height was not enough to cause significant damage. So the point is that just one earthquake can cause several of the hazards, many hazards. Here you can see a figure where the fires resulting from that 1995 Kobe earthquake, you can see that in that figure. These fires are triggered by earthquake, some industrial structures or buildings, or if some you can say some material is stored which can catch fire easily. So the earthquake shaking can induce or trigger fires also. Another picture from the fires resulting from this 1995 Kobe earthquake. So we have these big questions. The first question is that where will the future earthquake occur? We already know the locations of all past earthquakes from last several years, and we know now that their location follows a pattern which matches with the plate boundaries and the location of major active faults. So we already can guess now, because the theory of plate tectonics give us an indication that we can use that past data of the historical earthquakes recorded. We can use it to forecast the location with certain certainty, or you can say with certain confidence, the location of future earthquake. So we can guess, or you can say predict in terms of probabilistic framework about the possibility of future earthquake at different locations. The earthquakes, we know now that they are mainly controlled by the interaction of different parts of land, whether it is converging or diverging or the transform boundary. So we can tell in the probabilistic manner about the possibility of future earthquake at certain locations. This is one of the biggest question which needs to answer for all important cities and locations around the globe. And also we need to have the second question answered, and that is what will be their size. Obviously, just answering this question that this particular site may experience an earthquake in future is not enough. We also have to forecast about their size also. So the size of earthquakes depend on the properties or characteristics of those faults or plate boundaries. The larger faults, maybe they are capable of producing moderate to large magnitude earthquakes, but there can be some faults which are smaller. They may not be able to produce any significant earthquake. So we have to tell about their size also for future earthquakes. Then another important question is that what will be their frequency of occurrence? How frequently we can experience earthquakes in future at a particular site. So some obviously it also depends on the fault characteristics or the properties of the seismic source which is causing those earthquakes. If, for example, some particular fault has a capability to store the energy for thousands of years and then just release it, the frequency of occurrence will be low. But for some particular faults, if they can just have the tendency to store the energy and release it after every few hundred years, then the frequency of occurrence will be high. So we can understand and study the historical data of different seismic sources, and we can use that data to forecast about the potential frequency of occurrence in future also. Then another important question is what will be the ground shaking intensity at a site produced by earthquakes of different size, focal depth and the epicentral location. So for earthquakes, okay, we can have these questions, but the ground shaking intensity experienced at a particular site, this is what most of the structural designers and other stakeholders are interested in. how much shaking a structure is going to experience during a particular earthquake. So we not only have to forecast or answer these questions about the size or location or frequency of occurrence of earthquakes, we also have to tell about the ground shaking intensity experienced by different sites. So if a site is subjected to earthquakes of different sizes or different faults which have different focal mechanisms, and they are located at different distances from that site, we have to just come up with the estimated ground shaking intensity which should be used for the design of a particular structure at that site. Then another important question is, how will the ground motion be influenced by local soil conditions and geology? This is also an important aspect. The seismic waves, we know already that they are influenced or modified by the local soil conditions and the intermediate geology. So the effect should be quantified. In current practice, this effect is quantified by different building codes, and they provide a factor which is more than 1, and then you can amplify your forces by that factor in order to account for the amplification of local soil effects. If the local soil conditions are such that they tend to de-amplify or diminish the ground shakings, the factor will be less than 1. So different building codes address this issue empirically by prescribing different coefficients for that. Another important question is, what will be the earthquake hazard, landslide or liquefaction produced at the site? So you have to estimate the likelihood of different earthquake hazards which can be experienced at a particular site. So out of all of those, for example, ground shaking, surface rupture, tsunami or earthquake induced fires, etc., liquefaction, you have to answer this question first, that what are some of those hazards which can be expected at this site. And lastly, how about the susceptibility of buildings and structures to damage from the ground shaking and ground failures? This question is about the vulnerability of buildings. This is not about the hazard. So this will not be covered in this lecture, but we will be mostly covering these all questions, and we will be just having a basic introduction of some of the issues in answering these questions. So the basic equation we have is the disaster is equal to hazard times vulnerability, and sometimes the exposure also is multiplied, but sometimes this exposure is considered a part of the vulnerability. So in fact, risk is equal to hazard time vulnerability. This is our basic equation. So hazard time vulnerability is risk. In case of seismic hazard or seismic vulnerability, it will become seismic risk. So hazard is a natural or man-made phenomena, and this lecture is about this seismic hazard. In this case, it will be seismic hazard. The vulnerability is related to the quality of built environment. If the structures are well designed, the vulnerability will be low, and if they are not properly designed, the vulnerability will be high. The exposure is related to the urbanization or unplanned development, or in fact population. So we will be focusing on this part of the equation, and in that also this lecture is about only the seismic hazard. The seismic hazard. So to reduce risk of disaster and increase safety, we need to estimate the hazard properly and reduce vulnerability. So hazard is, in this case, is seismic hazard, and it is not controlled by any human activity. It is a natural phenomena which we have to quantify, we have to estimate. So the estimation or the process of estimation of hazard, the seismic hazard at a particular site, is the seismic hazard assessment, and this will be our discussion point for a later part of this lecture. So you may have places around the globe where the hazard is very high, but the vulnerability is low. The quality of construction is very good, so therefore the overall risk may be low in those cases. You may also have the cases where the hazard is low but the vulnerability is high. So although the earthquake hazard is not that high, but the quality of construction is very poor, and therefore in that case also we will have a high risk. And we may also have a case where the hazard is high and at the same time the vulnerability is also high. That would result in a large amount of risk, and that needs special attention in such cases. So this process of seismic hazard assessment, let us just introduce it in this session, and then we will continue in the next session also. That the basic equation is this one. In case of seismic hazard, it will be seismic hazard times the seismic vulnerability will constitute the seismic risk. So in principle, the seismic hazard assessment can address any natural hazard associated with earthquakes. It can include the ground shaking, fault rupture, surface rupture, landslide, liquefaction, or tsunami also. However, the most interest is in the estimation of ground shaking hazard, the first hazard which we have studied, the ground shaking, since it causes the largest economic losses in most earthquakes. So obviously the fault rupture will only be experienced on those structures which are located on a fault line. The tsunami is experienced for those structures which are located on coastal areas. Liquefaction is also is subjected only in the areas where the soil have very low shear strength, and landslide also is at selected locations where the slope stability issues are there. But the ground shaking hazard is the very first and most important hazard which is caused by earthquakes. The shaking of the ground results in the damage of structures and also in the economic and social loss also. So it is the most important hazard, and in this lecture we will be studying this hazard only. So all of the seismic hazard, the ground motion is the predominant cause of damage from earthquakes. For example, building collapses, dam failures, landslide also is primarily caused by ground shaking. Liquefaction is also caused by the ground motion or ground shaking. So therefore we will restrict only our discussion to the estimation of earthquake ground motion hazard. So here I repeat again one important point, that there is no design against the fault rupture. If your structure is located on a fault line, you cannot make it strong enough to resist fault rupture. So the only remedy or solution for reducing or avoiding the surface rupture failure is to just not build on the fault lines. Avoid building any structure or any important facility on the fault line. So we will be discussing the earthquake ground motion hazard, the shaking or vibration of earth's surface resulted due to earthquake. So there are many different ground motion parameters which quantify the damage potential or which tell us that how high or low that ground motion is. Those can be displacement, the displacement of the ground, velocity, peak value of velocity, for example, peak value of displacement, or peak value of the ground acceleration. Or we can also classify, or you can say quantify the intensity of ground motion by the modified Mercalli intensity scale MMI number. So if we want to tell about the ground motion parameter at a particular site, we can, you can say, designate a displacement, peak value of displacement, velocity or acceleration, or also the MMI value which is expected at a particular site in future earthquake. And by the way, there are other ground motion parameters also. For example, the spectral acceleration is also an important ground motion parameters, and nowadays it is most widely used. But generally the peak ground acceleration, PGA value, is considered to be the preferred ground motion parameter, PGA, peak ground acceleration. The seismic hazard now, in our case, will now become the ground shaking hazard. So we are not talking about tsunamis or liquefaction or all others, we are talking about ground shaking hazard when we talk about seismic hazard. And it is defined as the probability of occurrence of potentially destructive seismic ground shaking at a given site within a given time interval. So it is now defined as in probabilistic framework that it is the probability of occurrence of a potentially destructive ground shaking at a given site within a given interval. So it's like I can say that 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years. In 50 years. So this will be a complete description of the ground shaking hazard. So for example, if I say that the 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years corresponding to this definition of seismic hazard, let's say my number is 0.1 g, this is the peak ground acceleration. So if I say that 0.1 g PGA is at my site corresponding to this definition of ground shaking hazard, which is 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years. It simply means that the probability that in next 50 years my site will experience a ground shaking more than this number 0.1 g, that probability is 10%. So I repeat again that in next 50 years my site will experience a PGA more than this number. The probability of having a PGA more than the 0.1 g is 10%. So this is the complete description of the ground shaking hazard, that we define it not just one fixed number. For example, previously before this probabilistic definition we were having the deterministic definition, and that was, for example, if I say 0.1 g, in that case it would have simply mean that the maximum acceleration which can be experienced at this particular site is 0.1 g in future, given let's say 50 years or any time. But now in the probabilistic definition we not only give fixed number, we also associate that number with a probability of exceedance in a particular number of years. So this is the exposure time. And why we are mostly interested in the acceleration, because we know already that the acceleration can be multiplied by mass of the structure to calculate the forces, and those forces can be applied to our structure statically, and we can carry out the design, we can proportion our structure to resist those forces. So if we get the peak ground acceleration, we can convert that into those design forces. So this PGA is our design ground motion parameter, and as I said in the start, different building codes will provide the ground motion parameters or the input required to calculate the effective earthquake forces, and those input will be the function of the peak ground acceleration. So if we have the ground acceleration, this graph, the ground acceleration versus time, we can integrate it to get the ground velocity versus time graph, and we can integrate it once more to calculate the ground displacement versus time graph. So the idea is that this peak ground acceleration is the index of seismic loading. It is the ground motion parameter or hazard parameter, and that number is converted, or it is used to calculate the forces, design forces, which we then use for the purpose of structural design. Now let me introduce these seismic hazard maps. You can see here that this is the global seismic hazard map, and the hazard map is a map which shows the potential locations where the future earthquake can occur, and it also tells us the level of the ground shaking which can be experienced in case of the future earthquake at different locations. So in this map you can see here the color is indicating the modified Mercalli intensity scale, and based on the ranges of the MMI scale, for example, the MMI 5 and below is called as the zone 0, and that is represented by the white color here, and then we have the MMI number 6, which is yellow color, then orange, and then red means the MMI 9 and above. So you can see here that certain locations around the world have a more probability of having a strong ground shaking compared to other parts of the world. So here you can see this area, similarly here this whole area, the west coast in US, and here also in the South America. And obviously you can guess by now that these locations of high expected shaking in future, they are matching with the locations of past earthquakes and also the major plate boundaries. So this kind of a map which shows the level of future ground shaking, the estimated map, basically this map is the outcome of the seismic hazard analysis or seismic hazard assessment, and this map tells us the likelihood of future ground shaking at different sites, and the process which is used to construct such a map, or basically to calculate the likelihood or probability of future ground shaking at different locations, that process is called the seismic hazard analysis. So you can develop the hazard map of any particular area if you can carry out the seismic hazard analysis of that area. For example, this map is the seismic hazard map of Thailand, and it tells us the level of future ground shaking which can be experienced at certain locations in Thailand, and it is developed as a result of the seismic hazard analysis of Thailand. So the numbers here you can see, the numbers here are the peak ground accelerations in the units of G. So for example, 0.15 means 0.15 G. So you can use the value of G, the acceleration due to gravity, in your units to convert it into the acceleration value. So this is the peak acceleration which will be experienced by the ground here at that particular site, and it is defined in the probabilistic manner as I explained earlier. The definition of the seismic hazard in this map is that with 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years exposure period. So 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years. So which means that the probability of having an earthquake which will cause an acceleration more than 0.15 G in next 50 years, the probability is 10%. So this 10% basically you can say that it represents a kind of acceptable risk. So you have 10% chance that a number more than this number will occur in 50 years. But 90% of the time, the 90% chance is that the maximum acceleration experienced at that particular site will be less than 0.15 G. So if you are designing your structure to this 0.15 G, it means that 90% is the chance that your structure will be experiencing forces less than those which you used for designing that structure. And there can still be possibility, 10% possibility, that an earthquake causing more than this number may occur at that particular site, but this is a kind of an acceptable risk which you are taking. If you change your hazard definition to, for example, 2% probability of exceedance in 50 years, for the same site now the number will be higher, maybe 0.25 G, because now you have redefined your seismic hazard such that your acceptable the number indicating your acceptable risk is low. So you are saying that I just want a number that for in next 50 years there should be only 2% chance that an earthquake causing a number more than this should occur. So a more kind of a strict definition, and obviously the number corresponding to that strict definition will be higher. So if you are designing on the higher number, then you will be just having 2% possibility of exceeding that number. But if you design on a lower number, then the possibility of exceedance will increase. This is the seismic hazard map for US. So you can see here that these are the contours indicating the maximum acceleration value which can be experienced at different sites or locations. So sometimes different building codes they divide the whole country into different zones, and those zones have almost same levels of seismicity. So therefore you just need to know the zone of your site, and that zone will be used in the seismic design process. So these zones are also developed based on the values of the expected peak ground acceleration conforming to a particular hazard definition. So this is the seismic zone map of the US, and it is developed based on the PGA values. So now the country is divided into zone 0, zone 1, zone maybe 2A and 2B. Here you can see 2A and 2B, then 3 and 4. So the country is now divided into different zones, and all you need to know now is that in which zone your particular site is located, for example here, and that information will be used. That information will be converted into the ground motion parameter, which will be used to calculate the earthquake forces for the design of the building at that particular site. So this example is the seismic hazard maps for Pakistan, which are developed by different studies. So figure A is the one which is currently in the building code of Pakistan. So you can see here the color contours, they are indicating the values of peak ground acceleration, and the definition here is 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years. So these numbers are corresponding to this definition. So you can identify that what are the areas which have more seismic hazard, or the future ground shaking or in those areas will be more, and this is the output or result from the seismic hazard analysis of Pakistan. So some other studies, this B is from Geological Survey of Pakistan. I have taken this comparison from this paper. You can refer to that for more detail. This figure C is from the Pakistan Meteorological Department, PMD. The figure D is from the Global Seismic Hazard Program, also called as G-shape. So you can see here that based on different assumptions used in the seismic hazard assessment process, different studies are predicting a slightly different hazard level. Sometimes the difference is very high. For example, you can see here the difference in the seismicity pattern, hazard pattern is basically quite different. So another example from the same reference. So you can see here that these contours are the PGA values. The colors are showing also the PGA values for different parts of the country. So this is something which you will be getting as a result of seismic hazard analysis of a particular region. You can do it for one city also, or a site specific seismic hazard can also be performed, which means that at just only one particular site you are interested in calculating the ground motion parameters for future earthquakes. So for important building projects or for important structures, the site specific seismic hazard assessment is also performed, and in fact that will become the part of the overall design process. So site specific seismic hazard assessment, but you can also do it for a whole study region. And obviously you would have guessed by now that we use the past historical recorded data and the activity of different faults and seismic sources, as well as we include the effect of local geology, and we integrate all of those probabilities of getting different magnitudes from different seismic sources to come up with a final number at each location in the study area, and that number represents the seismic hazard level or shaking at that particular point. So this process, seismic hazard analysis, which we will be seeing in detail in next session, that is widely used by engineers, regulators and planners to mitigate earthquake losses. So not only engineers which use its results to design the buildings, it is also used by the policymakers and planners, and it is the basis of most of the national building codes also, and all the strategies for disaster management, they ideally should be based on the results of the seismic hazard analysis. Specifying a design seismic design level for individual structures and building codes, this is one of the most important use of the results of seismic hazard analysis. Evaluating the seismic safety of existing facilities. So obviously existing structures should be evaluated, that their performance should be checked under the seismic hazard calculated as part of the hazard assessment. The planning for societal and economic emergencies. So for emergency preparedness, the planning should be based on the level of seismic hazard at different locations in the country. Setting priorities for the mitigation of seismic risk and also for insurance analysis. So all of these applications are there, but most important ones, the direct ones for structural engineers, are for the design of new buildings and for the performance assessment of existing buildings. For social scientists and for policy makers, all of the other applications are also there. So we will not go into much detail, so we will end this session here with just a quick introduction of the two basic methodologies for seismic hazard assessment, and then we will continue the same discussion in next session. The probabilistic seismic hazard assessment, which is the most latest approach, but previously we also had the deterministic seismic hazard assessment. So we have DSHA, deterministic seismic hazard assessment, and also we have probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. PSHA is a latest approach and DSHA is a relatively older approach. The DSHA, deterministic seismic hazard analysis, it considers the effect of only one single earthquake scenario, which is the most controlling earthquake or the maximum earthquake, you can say, at a particular site. So for example, if you have this particular site and you have this fault, let's say fault A, which is having some distance from the particular site. Similarly, you also have a fault B here. So deterministic seismic hazard assessment is only based on one critical earthquake scenario, which will be obviously controlled by the closest fault and also controlled by the maximum magnitude expected at that fault. So if you say that M7, magnitude 7 earthquake is the maximum magnitude which this controlling fault can produce. So just based on this one scenario, that the M7 and fault A, based on these scenario, you just estimate the peak ground acceleration at your site. This process will be deterministic seismic hazard assessment. And by the way, the equations which help us in predicting the value of ground shaking at particular site with given magnitude at some distance r, those equations are called ground motion prediction equations, GMPEs. They are also called as the attenuation models, and basically they are of this kind that they relate the ground motion parameter, let's say peak ground acceleration, with distance r. So basically they tell us that how the value of a particular ground motion parameter will attenuate as we increase the distance. So for different magnitude values, it will give us the estimated values of ground shaking at a particular distance. So we know already that we have this controlling fault and we have this maximum magnitude, and that is located at this distance. So based on all of this scenario, we can use such a ground motion prediction equation or attenuation model to just predict the future ground shaking at our site. If we do this, we will be basically doing the deterministic seismic hazard assessment. So obviously the challenge is the selection of a representative earthquake on which the hazard assessment would be based. Since this process only considers one scenario, one critical earthquake scenario with maximum magnitude and the most controlling fault, so therefore the process, the main challenge will be the selection of that representative scenario. In PSHA, on the other hand, we quantify the hazard at a site from all earthquakes of all possible magnitudes at all significant distances from the sites of interest. So in PSHA, we will be considering the possibility of having an earthquake from fault A as well as from fault B also. We will be explicitly taking into account the occurrence rates of earthquake, or the, you can say, the seismic potential of both of the faults A and B, we will take that into account. We will take the distances from both of the faults into account, and we will integrate their probabilities to come up with final combined number which will represent the ground shaking hazard at that site. So the hazard will be represented as a probability by taking into account their frequency of occurrences. So all the seismic sources which are located at different distances and all the magnitudes which are expected from those seismic sources are integrated in this case, and finally we come up with a more realistic number which can represent the future ground shaking. So we will be discussing more about the probabilistic seismic hazard assessment in future. So the deterministic earthquake scenario which we use for DSHA, it just becomes one subset of the probabilistic methodology. So it's not that we just directly add all the hazard coming from all the sources, we basically convert them into probabilities or the rates of occurrences, and then we combine the rates of occurrences. So finally we describe the seismic hazard in terms of probabilistic definition, as I have said, that for example 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years. So I will end this session here, and then in next lecture we will be discussing more about the probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. So till then, stay safe. Thank you.